Done that last week. I apologize. There will be one next week as well. And it covers verses 16 through 22, manas. Now, let me first say, manas is not plural. It is singular. We don't have one mana and two manas. Okay, no, manas is singular. It is the entity. And as we will tell, it is a bit of a rascal. It's the rascally part of our mind. Okay. Last week we talked about store consciousness, which is the overriding essence of our mind. We store everything from our previous realms in embryo, in birth, as a child, and then we accumulate more and more into our store consciousness from the environment, school, parents, ancestors. All of those things enter into our store consciousness. So, let's read the verses on manas. Seeds of delusion give rise to the internal formations of craving and afflictions. These forces animate our consciousness as mind and body manifest themselves. With store consciousness as its support, manas arise. Its function is mentation, grasping the seeds it considers to be a self. The object of manas is the mark of a self, found in the field of representations at the point where manas and store consciousness touch. As the ground of wholesome and unwholesome, of the other six manifesting consciousness, manas continue discriminating. Its nature is both indeterminate and obscured. Manas goes with the five universals, with mati of the five particulars, and with the four major and 8 secondary afflictions. All are indeterminate and obscured. As shadow follows form, manas always follows store. It is a misguided attempt to survive, craving for continuation and blind satisfaction. When the first stage of the bodhisattva path is attained, the obstacles of knowledge and affliction are transformed. At the 10th stage, the yogi transforms the belief in a separate self, and store consciousness is released from manas. All right, if last week was like the appetizer, this week is like the salad and main course all together. I was sharing prior to the service that I spent about 35 hours of study this week just on this Dharma talk and on these readings, because it is incredibly complex, especially to those not familiar with different aspects of Buddhism. And it's my job to make it, to decomplex it, to simplify it as much as is possible. It will not be an easy chore, so bear with me today. And I'm going to stick pretty closely with the book because my own interpretations would certainly mess things up in a heartbeat. So, in these verses, we are dealing with the 7th consciousness, manas. Now, manas arises from store consciousness. It is part and parcel of store consciousness, yet it just sort of hangs out on the sideline. So it's in the perimeter of the football field, but not at the 50-yard line in the center. It's just sort of off to the side. It is part of, cannot be extricated from, and we don't want to extricate it, and I'll explain that to you later. We can't get rid of it. But as the Buddha pointed out, and we say in our morning bell chant, everything is created by mind alone. The Buddha also said there is nothing worse than an untamed mind. Now, the manas are the part of our consciousness that require the most amount of taming because they're so subversive. It is so subversive. See, I haven't made the mistake. I made it plural. Singular, David. Singular. Manas is very subversive. It wants us to believe that we have a separate self, that we are a separate self, that we are the center of our universe, rather than being part and parcel of the whole, a continuation of everything that has been and everything that will be. So, our habit energies, right? Any of you have any habits? I know none of you have habits, okay? Our habit energies and cravings come together and create a tremendous source of energy that conditions our actions, speech, and thinking. This is called manas. That's what it is. It is the perfect storm within our consciousness. If left unattended, it will control your actions, your speak, take over your volition, your ability to choose, and it will direct you where it's supposed to direct you, into delusion, and therefore into afflictions and suffering. The mode of perception of manas is always false perception, because the wrong perception of manas, especially its view of a self, is manas in creating and maintaining erroneous perceptions. That's its whole job. It has no other job but that. So, the very first verse. Seeds of delusion give rise to the internal formations of craving and affliction. These forces animate, that's an important word here, our consciousness as mind and body manifest themselves. Now, when I was a kid, I was addicted to cartoons, okay? And all things Disney. Okay, I just love the animation. That's animation right there at work. Okay, somebody knocking at the door, animation. I just loved watching the movements. I loved Wile Coyote always getting his due, the Roadrunner always getting his due. Yeah, I just love that animation. Now, our mind and our bodies manifest continuously. Okay? Now, when manas, the seventh consciousness, is involved, however the seeds of delusion in our store consciousness are able to manifest as mental formations, suffering is the result. Okay, one of the names given to store consciousness is store for the attachment to self. Now, what have we learned about attachment? What do they bring us? Anything we attach ourselves to will create suffering, period. Anything. So manas is the energy of ignorance, thirst, and craving. It arises from the store consciousness and turns back to grab onto a part of store consciousness from the sidelines. The part of store consciousness that manas tries to grasp is that of the subject that perceives. At this point, manas and store consciousness overlap, and as a result of this overlapping, an object of the grasping of manas is produced. Now, we already said that it's manas' job to stir the pot by grabbing on to the delusion of a self. That there is such a thing as me that is independent of all other things, which is not true. From Buddhism, we understand on this path that we are interdependent and interconnected. There are literally 0 degrees of separation between any of us. We are. The activity of manas is thinking, cognizing, measuring, reasoning, grasping, and clinging. Day and night, manas discriminate things. I am this person, you are that person. This is mine, that is yours. This is me, that is you. Pride, anger, fear, and jealousy. Mental formations that are based in seeing ourselves as separate, every one of them arises from manas. It does not have the capacity, and this is very important, manas does not have the capacity to touch the realm of things in themselves, or things as they are, or sometimes we call it thusness, the thusness of something. The attachment of manas to a self is based on an image that it has created, just as we fall in love with our image of someone, not the person themselves. Wow, how often have I done that? Now, I have a very deep and abiding love for, I'm just going to pick a couple random people, for Nathan and Robert, for Ellen and Peter, okay, just because they vibrate with love. And so I feel this strong attachment to them. And it's like I've built up in my mind who they are. And yet, I have never been to Nathan and Robert's home. I have never been to Ellen and Peter's home. I don't know where they live, how they live. I don't know if their house is just a clutter bus or if it is all neatly organized. You know, I have my suspicions, but do I know? No. So I am actually basing this love on a complete, not utterly complete, but in the most important parts, a complete lack of knowledge and understanding. That's what manas does. You know, there's this thing, love at first sight. Boing. All right? You don't even know the person. You just met him or her at the bar last night. What are you talking about? It's true love. Are you kidding me? That is the work of manas. Even the separation. I am in love with this person. That is separation. It is the lack of recognition that I am that person, and that person is me, and that we are. This is important. Contact between the six sense spaces and the six sense objects may result in the planting of seeds of attachment, craving, anger, hatred, despair, and so on. These seeds may grow to become more important as the same kind of contact continues. They are called internal formations, stuff we make up, or they're also known as knots or fetters because they tie us up, they bind us to this false sense of self, this delusional sense of self. The planting of these seeds, the formation of these knots takes place when mindfulness, this is important, mindfulness and insight is not present. Now, there's your first clue right there about, so what do we do with manas? When I was teaching a class in abnormal psychology, I asked this question, and I had a paper written on this question. What are your tendencies and what purpose do they serve in your life? Wow, I got back some wild responses on that one. But you see, we all have tendencies. There's not one of us here that doesn't have tendencies toward or against something. Why is that important? In the Sin Sin Ming, the very first verse, the middle way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. As soon as we have preferences, as soon as we divide things into right, wrong, good, bad, black, white, yes, no, you, me, we're already in trouble. But through insight of our tendencies, of the manas at work in us all the time, they never take a break, and mindfulness as we go through our day about what am I doing? And I never ask the question, why? Why are you doing that? No. What you're doing and what purpose does it serve in your life? Now I'm going to go all shrink on you here. Okay? All behaviors are functional. They serve a purpose. All relationships are functional. Okay? They serve a purpose. They're based on some kind of internal needs we have. Let's face it. If we didn't have needs, we wouldn't be in relationships because they're just too darn hard. And so it's in the mutual meeting of those needs, negotiating those needs, discussing those needs, coming to terms with those needs, and then acting out of mutuality. That's where love grows without the manas. A pure love that doesn't have attachment. Don't you just hate it in movies or something? Oh, I need you so much. Well, that's a bad start. Because healthy relationships say, I desire to have you in my life. I don't need you in my life. You do not complete me. Nor do I complete you in any way. You are you, I am me, we are we, and we become a different entity, but still connected in every way. So anytime we base our tendencies on something that I just need to do that, we're in trouble. We need to examine carefully what purpose does that serve in our lives. And if it's not a wholesome purpose, then we need to work very diligently to tame the mind and eliminate that specific purpose. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The next verse. With store consciousness as its support, manas arises. Its function is mentation, grasping the seeds it considers to be a self. Now, mentation. I had to look it up. So I did that for you. You know what it means? Delusion. Mentation is delusion. Okay? So, I learned a new word today. But that's the function of the manas, is to delude us. Grasping at the seeds of store consciousness that manas considers to be a separate self. So we know what the 6 sense bases are, because we talk about them in our chants every day, every Sunday. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind. We also know the 6 sense bases work together: form, sound, smell, taste, touch, and objects of mind. Remember that from our chants? Okay, so sense base and sense objects, they go together. Manas is a sense base for mind consciousness in the same way that the eyes are the base for seeing, for sight. However, the objects of mind, thoughts, cognition, do not arise from the external world the way that objects, form, sound, taste, and tactile sensation do. Instead, they come from the working of manas with the seeds in our store consciousness. Without the resulting objects of mind, there would be no mind consciousness. Just as without an object of form for the base sense of the eye contact, there would be no eye consciousness. Okay, if I pull my mask up over my eyes and I can't see any of you, I don't have that base consciousness of eye, and then there would not be the consciousness of sight. So a consciousness is always a consciousness of something. It has to be a consciousness of something. For example, when you're angry at something or someone. When you're frustrated at something or someone. When you're sad at something or someone or about something. Okay, there is a direct connect there with the consciousnesses. To think is to think about something. Now, one of our great philosophers said, "I think, therefore I am." Wrong. I think, therefore we are. That would be along the Buddhist path of thinking. So, if you look at a plate there are 2 consciousnesses there. Well, actually, all the consciousnesses are involved, but it has a top and a bottom. Without a top, there could be no bottom. Without a bottom, there could be no top. And then there's the consciousness of what the plate is made of. Is it china? Is it plastic? Is it paper? Is it iron? Is it tin? All of those things are involved in this thing we call a plate. And they cannot be separated out. So we have the perceiver, us, what is perceived, a plate, and the thing in itself, all of the different consciousnesses surrounding the plate. These are called the self-revealing aspects, and they deeply depend on each other. So much here. I'm going to skip ahead. All Manas do is to think and calculate, always thinking, believing, grasping, considering store consciousness as its object. As a separate entity, it is always present as a kind of instinct that takes its object as itself. The nature of Manas is delusion. It is born from the blocks of ignorance that are present already in the seeds of our consciousness, store consciousness. It is always there, grasping the idea of self and non-self. Now, here's a very important thing. But Manas is unaware of itself. It continues to believe in the idea of a permanent, eternal self, and so it is always separating and discriminating between what is self and what is not self. The only way to help Manas stop grasping at the notions of self and not self is for us to practice deep looking into the impermanent and interdependent reality of nature. That's how we put the brakes on the Manas. Next, I have to move here. The object of Manas is the mark of self, found in the field of representations at the point where Manas and store consciousness touch. So, we've already talked about the field of representations. I know what, let's say, Nathan represents to me. That doesn't mean I know Nathan. That is a representation. If I see his face on a billboard, I'd recognize it. Oh, that's Nathan. Okay? It would simply still be a representation. It would not be the reality who our Dharma brother is. Looking deeply into Manas, we can identify the seeds of ignorance and the internal formations of craving and afflictions that are there, which are held in our store consciousness. It is like looking into an orange and being able to see the orange tree that will grow from the seeds. No, we can't do that. So what does that mean about Manas? Manas is obscured. That's what that part of the verse means. Obscured. You can't really see it. Okay? It is covered by a veil of ignorance. Does that mean it should be eliminated? No, it cannot be eliminated. It can only be tamed. We don't want to eliminate it. So let's move on to why not? Why don't we just want to get rid of it? The next verse, 19. As the ground of wholesome and unwholesome of the other six manifesting consciousness, Manas continues discriminating. Its nature is both indeterminate and obscured. We covered some of this in the last verse, okay? But it's called the actual ground of wholesome and unwholesome. Why does it have both of those? Typically, what it begins out with is an unwholesome representation of a separate sense of self. When we tame the mind in that regard and understand there is no separate self, I am one of the all, just as the flower is part of the compost already is compost, and the compost already is the flower. Okay, but the obscuration of the manas doesn't want us to see that part. Now, we know intellectually, this is why diligent practice is necessary. We know intellectually that everything in the world is connected with us. Everything in the cosmos is connected with us. We talked about Indra's net last week. Okay, the jewels reflecting every other jewel in the net. Okay. So we still struggle with not seeing an independent self. We want to see ourselves as independent, having a separate body, an eternal body, okay? But we don't. Now, what else does manas do? It's part of that store consciousness that has as its root our survival instinct. All right? Now that's where it wants us to have a separate sense of self simply for our survival. If a car is driving right at me because I'm walking in the middle of the street, I can't say, oh, that's not me. I don't have a separate sense of self. Okay, and that car is just a representation. Don't worry about it. No, I'm going to end up dead. All right? I will be completely removed from this realm. Probably come back as a sea urchin. Okay? But it protects us in that way. Now, when we are in a dream state, that is all the work of manas. It is creating representations. Okay? But we have to remember that person in our dream is not going to be there when we wake up. Okay, so manas is at full force in play when we are asleep and when we are in danger. If someone is going to hit us, we don't think about it. Well, let me see. Let me calculate the trajectory of their fist and where my head is at. We don't think about that. We move. That's the instinct survival that we are granted by this. Verse 20, companions of manas. Manas goes with the 5 universals, with mati of the 5 particulars, and with the 4 major and 8 secondary afflictions. All are indeterminate and obscured. There are those words again. Indeterminate, which means they could be wholesome or unwholesome, and obscured or masked or veiled. They're hard to see. Okay, now the 5 particular mental formations are not found at all times in every consciousness. Here they are: zeal, determination, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Now, of these 5 particulars, zeal contains the quality of attraction. You are drawn to something, someone. You are drawn to look at something or someone. Okay, and to know about it, to be interested in it. The second one, determination, can also be described as discernment. You think you have recognized the object, you form an idea of it. The third, mindfulness, means in this context that the object of your attention has come to exist in the here and now for you. You are all right here, right now. I recognize that. So I'm living in reality. I'm not subject to manas right now. I would be if I claimed to know anything truly deep, deep down in any of you. That would be a falsehood. Concentration here means you focus your attention on that object. The meaning of wisdom here is that you believe you know exactly what the object is. Now, that's where the delusion comes in. Have you ever heard that saying, if you meet Buddha on the road, kill him? That was actually a book written. If you meet Buddha on the road, kill him. In other words, if you meet anyone who claims to have it all, to know it all, to do it all, to be it all, run. Because that's a delusion. The Buddha said, the Dharma is like a snake. If you are not careful in how you learn the Dharma, it will bite you. That sounds a little weird, doesn't it, coming from the Buddha? But it's true. The Dharma can be misinterpreted. There are all sorts of false teachers out there, and I urge you, everything I'm sharing with you today, don't believe it because I said it. Put it to the test in your life. Recognize those tendencies that bring about unwholesome results or suffering or affliction. Work on them. Work to tame them. Live in the Dharma that teaches how to tame the mind. The Sin Sin Ming, by the way, just a short, I think it's got 18 verses to it, and it's just the most wonderful teaching on taming the mind. All right. Now, here's how strong manas is. The Buddha taught a parable that illustrated this, the strength of the manas. There was a man who went away on a trip for a couple days from the village he was at. He left his son at home. When he returned home, he found that his home had been burned to the ground. He had been robbed by bandits, and there was the body of a child. And he loved that child so much, and he just went into deep mourning. He threw himself on the ground. He had a funeral. He had the ashes of his child. He had a beautiful silk bag made that he carried the ashes with him everywhere, and the ashes were never apart from him. Then one night, the son, who had been kidnapped by the bandits, not killed, returned to the house that his father had rebuilt. He had knocked on the door. "Father, it is your son." And the man was outraged. "Go away, my son is dead. Don't bother me." And the son tried again and again and again until he finally gave up. That is the strength of manas. Okay, if we don't test out the reality, the truth, as it is in this very moment, then we can be lost very quickly. Now, that kind of strength that the manas holds gets all the way down into the roots of fanaticism. Okay, that's a word we've heard a lot of in the past decade or so. And you can find fanatics no matter where you go. You know, there's one in every group of people, okay, that just, they have a belief system. And they carry that with them despite all other evidence. I've shared with you the story before about when my son Ari was 16. He came out, and I'll make this very brief. We went away to this retreat in Santa Fe, New Mexico, called The Experience, Coming Out Strong, How to Be a Healthy Gay Family. We needed that. Man, did we need that. Well, when we went back for the advance, and we loaded up the whole family. Okay, put them on a plane. We went to Santa Fe. Then there was a follow-up session. A couple months later, we loaded the family up again and flew back out to Santa Fe for another week. Okay, it was run by a very, very wonderful woman, Honey Ward is her name. And during the second session, we were to write a letter to someone. Ari wrote his letter to his mother and I about what he had experienced after coming out at school. The beatings, so severe that at one point he was just throwing up blood. The principal was totally unaware. When we got back and shared that information with the principal of the school, he went absolutely ballistic, called an immediate assembly of all students, suspended for the rest of the year those individuals that were involved. Okay, and he proclaimed, this will not happen in this school. Well, my father is a very devout Wesleyan. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Wesleyan faith tradition. It's a very fundamental tradition. Um, and I wrote a letter to my father. And I explained that Ari had come out and that we were on this journey. We had no idea where this journey was going to lead us, but we would like to invite he and my mother to go along on this journey with us. Didn't hear anything for 1 month, didn't hear anything for 2 months. The third month, we got a 23-page letter. I'm sorry, it was an 8-page letter, and it had been copied to 23 family members. And here are the first 2 lines. Your son is an abomination. You and your wife are going to hell for supporting his decision to be gay. He holds so tightly to this day, he's 91. To this day, he holds so tightly to his dogma that he has completely missed the spirituality of what Jesus actually taught, which was what? Love. Nothing but love. That's fanaticism. That's my personal experience, one personal experience with fanaticism. That is the power that Manas has if left unchecked. 21. Shadow follows form. As shadow follows form, Manas always follows store. You can't separate them. It is a misguided attempt to survive, craving for continuation and blind satisfaction. So Manas always follow the store consciousness like our shadow follows the movements of our body. In this way, the Manas is blind, blindly following whatever seed it latches onto in the store consciousness, whether they are wholesome or unwholesome. That's where when we talk about them being indiscriminate, you see, they can be wholesome seeds that they latch onto. But that latching becomes clinging. And even if they're wholesome seeds, if we cling, what happens? We suffer. Okay? But the unwholesome always contains within itself the potential of the wholesome according to the teaching of interbeing. Just as the flower can be seen in the garbage and the garbage can be seen in the flower. That is why transformation and awakening are possible. When Manas is awakened, when it has been transformed, it has the wonderful function of understanding of equality, which is samatha jnana, which means the ability to see the one in the all and the all in the one. What a delightful thing. You see, when we can transform the Manas. And then lastly, release. When the first stage of the Bodhisattva path is attained, the obstacles of knowledge and affliction are transformed. What does that mean? That we understand things differently in a more healthy way, a wholesome way, okay, and that our afflictions, that we have begun to recognize what function do they serve for us, and put actions into place to diminish their impact on us. Okay? At the 10th stage, the yogi transforms the belief in a separate self, and store consciousness is released from the grip of Manas. Now, that doesn't mean Manas is no longer there. Remember, Manas is a part of store consciousness. It has mean now that the only attachments that we allow because of our mindfulness and our practice and our discriminating mind, okay, we can train the Manas to attach itself to the wholesome seeds we are creating. And that is the work of the manas. Now, we only have about 10 minutes left, and again, we're not going to have meditation today because I need to hear if you have any questions, and if I am capable of answering them, I will. If not, I will research them and we'll talk about them at some other time. Do you have any questions about manas? Yes.
I'm trying to grasp the concept. Could the word symbol be sort of a substitute for manas? Like we are attached to the symbols of something?
That would be an aspect of the operation of manas, but manas itself is a part of the store consciousness. Okay, so that is an aspect. It symbolizes things. It creates symbols in our mind. Now, if we are seeing things as they are, those symbols are correct. If we are seeing things purely from the symbolic standpoint, then those things are not correct. If I look at you and say, oh, it's obvious you have red hair. No, you don't have red hair. Okay, so, but if I were somehow thinking or obsessing about red hair, I might see you as having red hair. That would be a symbolic representation that was inaccurate. It would be delusional for me to see you as having red hair. Is this dead?
No, but if people have questions, we can pass this mic around.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Ellen has a question.
How closely related is manas and mara?
There is no direct connect between manas and mara. Mara represents the suffering, okay, that we go through. That is Mara, the temptress, we call her. Mm-hmm. Okay, Manas is not a tempter or temptress in any way. Manas is a functional part of store consciousness that, for the good news, conducts our survival instinct. The bad news is very good at creating illusions and delusions. Now, Mara also creates illusions and delusions and tells lies. Okay, as Mara tried to deceive the Buddha as he was attaining enlightenment, okay, manas can do the same thing, but they are two separate, very separate entities. That was a very good question. Thank you, Ellen. Any other questions? Yes. And could you please state your name when you're asking a question, because they can't see you on camera. So
Shannon.
Shannon.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm trying to think of how to word this. You were using the example of like having love for a friend, having that, but never having seen their home. But wouldn't it almost be the opposite if you were coming from a place of genuine love and compassion and to see them just without the constructs around their home and if you were really it would almost be I don't know, quite the opposite, I think.
Well, Shannon, I can say, Shannon, I love you. And if I have an understanding of you and you of me, and I'm not basing that love, I'm calling it love, on anything other than what is. Direct experience, okay? We learn direct experience is the only reality. So if I have a mutually loving experience with you, then that's solid. That is not delusional, okay? But if I don't have that direct experience of a loving relationship with someone, then it would be delusional. It would be the manas at work for me to call that love, regardless of any other circumstances.
Because
Does that
it would
make
be,
sense?
yeah, it would be based on a projection.
Exactly. Anything based on the projection rather than what is in this very moment is nothing more than a projection. Another very good question.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. Questions? So for closing, I would like us all to stand, please. I would like everyone on this side to turn and face this way, everyone on this side to turn and face this way. I would like everyone to my left to give a deep bow to everyone on my right. Now, I would like everyone on my right to give a deep bow to everyone on my left. Now, you can face me. And I would like to give a deep bow to each and every one of you in gratitude for your being here today, for listening to this part 2 of a very complex concept, and for being willing to go with masks and with no chanting today. I know it's not per our usual format, but it's with deep appreciation that I bow to you. And you are dismissed.